along with Isaac Chua, my associate curator. His title makes me seem important. And, of course, Andrew Marcus, who worked on this exhibit. How the exhibit came about. A number of years ago, we found in the closet here a box with books that was slated to be buried, as all printed material with Hebrew cannot be thrown out. It was very fortunate that on that day that I discovered the box, Rabbi Elnikaveh was here, and I said, could you please look through here and see what if anything, I should say. He looked in there, he says, don't touch anything. So that's how these precious books were saved, the books that are now on exhibit upstairs. And it turned out that two of them are one of the few Siddurs in Judeo-Greco. We had a woman here from Cambridge, Cambridge now has the Geneza from Cairo. It was given to Cambridge, and she came here wondering if we had anything in Judeo-Greco, and Andrew actually made copies for her for their archives there in Cambridge. Now the Shaddayoth, which you're going to also see upstairs. We have a safe that's in the back here that we haven't been able to open for about 15 years, if not longer. And there was speculation about the wealth that we were going to find in there.
The treasure map from Yanina.
Right, the treasure map from Yanina. There was a combination, but it just wasn't working. And since we lost Hai, although even when Hai Janina was still alive, he couldn't open up the safe. One day, Marvin opened the safe. I don't know how, but he did it.
I happen to be here.
And you happen to be here too. And what was inside? A collection of silver artifacts, many of which were the Shaddayoth, which you're going to see us in our second exhibit.
What is Shaddayoth?
You're going to learn everything from our expert. I'm here simply to give a very simple introduction. I'm not going to take away from the scholars that worked on these exhibits. So without further ado, who's going to be first? Isaac Chua, who, by the way, is absolutely brilliant. And fortunately, we were able to get him very cheap before he became too famous. And he worked on coordinating not only my library, which is now digitized and soon will be available, but also this precious exhibit. Isaac, take over.
How many things in the books first?
Along with Rabbi Nissim. Okay.
Good afternoon. It's an absolute pleasure and an honor to be here in this very special Kehila, very special congregation. And I say that with a lot of love and admiration because, you know, every time I come here, there's something amazing with the people, and not only with the people, but also the treasures that are part of this community. I have had the chance to be in Janina a couple of times with Marsha in different trips, and I tell you, right, it takes you to very, very special, takes you back to very, very special time of things that were, of things that have been, and some of the many, many things that still are. As we had the chance to look a little bit at some of the stuff that we found here in the community and amongst the books that we are about to talk about. The Hachamim tell us something very, very important. They say, Masoret seyag la Torah. The Masoret, the tradition, it's a fence to the Torah. What amazes me is how amongst our communities these traditions were kept. Right? And not only kept, passed down. And then one of the wonders that I often wondered about, one of the questions that came into my mind often, is the Romaniote community. Right? You know the history, the Romaniote Jews, in many instances, they trace back the communities all the way back to the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, maybe even a little bit before that. There are great stories told by historians how this, all over what became the Ottoman Empire later, these communities were there all over the places. And you often wonder about the traditions, these traditions that I just mentioned, right? How far back the traditions go. And if there is any overlap in between the traditions that are kept in the Romaniote communities, the Ashkenazi communities, and the Sephardic communities that came later, because the history is rather interesting. You have the Romaniote Jews first all over these areas, which would be Greece, Rome, all of these, that's why the name Romaniote, right? At some point, Ashkenazi Jews, right, till about the 10th century, the Ashkenazi community is a very, very tiny community. Ashkenazi means Germany. The Franco-German Jews maybe are 10% of the population. Slowly, they move into these areas. Finally, in the 16th century, right, the end of the 15th century, Sephardic Jews come into the picture. What's the overlap in the traditions? Are there any crossovers? And I really kept on wondering about that. When you hear the sounds, the style, the way people pray, well, there was something rather interesting that as we've been learning about the many traditions of the community, our great esteemed Rabbi Gabriel Negrin, illuminated us in something very interesting. This before I hope I will not take it, but because you have to understand how this works. When I grew up in a Sephardic community, growing up, the style of chanting is based on what they call a makam system. The makam system are modes of music. It's sophisticated. And the hazanim, the cantors, in these Sephardic communities, since they're very young, they're taught how to use the makam. The makam, the mode of music, you start on one mode, you end on that same mode, the beginning of the prayer, the end of the prayer. And it became so sophisticated that you weave into different modes throughout the prayer. It's so fantastic, I tell you, because if you grow up in the Ottoman Empire of those days, many of the people knew the makam that the Hazan is chanting. So, as he starts, they know, oh, he's on Rast. And in the middle, a little bit, 2 minutes later, he went to Nihavend. And shortly after that, he went to Hijaz. Oh, he came back to Rast. Fantastic. And this was done in the mode, the Sufi mode, which was in order to create meditative thinking in the minds of the people. And so the prayer, there is real meditation going on over here. I assumed, in my ignorance, that, well, if you have the Romaniote communities under the Ottoman Empire, they're doing the same. They're using the makam system. And lo and behold, I come and I pray here, and there's a beautiful prayer going on, and I can't get the makam. I'm struggling, I'm listening, and I'm trying to pay attention. I'm saying, is he sticking to it? No, doesn't sounds different. When we spoke to Rabbi Negrin, he told us, absolutely no makam. We don't use the makam. We...
I could have told you that.
Okay.
You didn't ask.
Well, you know, it was like, right, it was illuminated.
Okay.
Because you would think that there'd be a crossover. if the Ottoman Empire comes, the Ottomans come and they take over an area, the music should shift. Everybody should shift into the usage of whatever they're bringing into, and that's the logic. That's what logic tells you. But the communities, the Romaniote communities, don't accept that. And the reason why they did it, according to Rabbi Negrin, if you agree,
Let's hear.
right? He says we stuck to the tradition, and that was marvelous to hear. Right? To them, in the Romaniote community, you stick to the tradition. You don't, because there is something new. It's almost like bringing pop music, right? They have the, right? You don't bring pop music to the synagogue, right? We have a tradition of music, a traditional system that we sing under. And that's what was kept for whatever hundreds, thousands of years maybe. You understand, the Ottoman Empire was from somewhere around the 1300s, right?
1453.
1453, right? So, and into, right, to the early 20th century. And so, this is a major difference in between the communities. And I began to wonder other things, right? Where the traditions are going to be kept in one community, but it's almost like going across the street, right? And in many cases, you have one synagogue on one side and the other synagogue on the other side, like you have in Athens, right? And you have the Sephardi synagogue in one side of the street, and on the other side, you have the Romaniote synagogue. You're allowed to cross the street.
On Shabbat.
On Shabbat.
Because there is a...
Right, so, and you still have these very, very sharp differences, at least in the chanting. But look at the literature. I begin to wonder. Because there's another part of the school of thought here. And I think this is what you have first. We got the ketubah. Is it the ketubah?
No.
You have the
No,
ketubah.
this Akedat Yitzchak.
You have the ketubah there.
You want me to go look at the book?
Yeah, you have the ketubah. So I wanted to start by this because this is striking, right? Ketubah liyom, right? Sheni shel Shavuot. Right, it's specifically one because we have today's Shavuot in the diaspora. So we have the ketubah. What's the ketubah? Does anybody know what a ketubah is?
Marriage document.
It's a marriage document. What is this doing?
Marriage contract.
Marriage contract. What is this doing on the liturgy of Shavuot?
Marriage with God.
Unbelievable, right? So we have, and I got to tell you, it's a manuscript. So that's one of the things, by the way, in a little parenthesis, that really, really impressed me about the community, because you're talking about communities that passed down a lot of what they had by not in the printed books, because since the other communities are larger, the Sephardic communities are larger in a sense, they can print a lot of books. But then the books that are printed, they come to Janina, for instance, and that's not the ritual, that's not the rite that's being followed there. So how do we continue the ritual properly? Well, we have a Siddur that came, or a Mahzor that came from Salonika, but we have little pieces of paper where we made notes or little booklets like this one, where we can guide the people to the readings of what we do. Interestingly enough, this is what it's called a ketubah. According to the Midrash, there's a fantastic, fantastic Midrash that says that at the time that the Jewish people received the Torah, this is recited in the holiday of Shavuot. At what point? It's at the time that we
say it before Baruch She'amar.
This is said before Baruch She'amar.
Yeah.
That's great. That's very good. Okay. That's rather
Other people say it at the P'tichat She'arim.
Other Romaniote communities.
Yeah, we'll say it P'tichat She'arim.
Okay. So that's great.
But we say it before
That's
Baruch She'amar.
That's really interesting. So here you go. This is an amazing thing, because so the rabbis of old, this is back 2,000 years ago, described the moment that the Torah was given to the Jewish people as a contract, a marriage contract in between God and the Jewish nation. God has made this come out as the Hatan, as the groom, and Knesset Israel, the Jewish people are the ones, it's like the bride, and she's accepting this contract. So in the community, the Janina community, and in Romaniote communities, they recite the Ketubah. It's amazing that because I grew up, which is very interesting, we used to say, chant the Ketubah also. And the Ketubah in the Sephardic community, it used to be chanted in Ladino, which is very interesting, right? This Ketubah is actually in Hebrew. And what's beautiful about this Ketubah is that it's partially in Aramaic,
Yes.
and it's almost the language that you would find on a standard Ketubah that when a marriage contract in between, when we do weddings today. So the author of this Ketubah is using the language of the Ketubah that we know for us to chant on the holiday. What's very interesting, and I have to tell you that why do you use the language of the real Ketubah for this? How come the author feels the freedom to use this is for a very interesting reason. Because all of us in the congregation know this language. It's not that we're ignoramus to the language that we use religiously, for lack of a better word, but we know the language. This is the language that we use every day. So for him to write in this style, of course you have to write the Ketubah in this style. So amazing. But to me it was a little bit interesting that all of a sudden there seems to be an overlap. Who started this idea of the Ketubah first? The Romaniote communities or the Sephardic communities? There's a fight. I'm just kidding. I don't know this. I don't know this because, unfortunately, there's not enough information sometimes on how old a piyut like this, how far back does it go? We can trace it back in the Sephardic communities a little bit more, but not so much in the Romaniote communities because there's no printing material that will take you back that long. So who's first? Are the Sephardim that are coming to Greece and Turkey, are they all of a sudden copying what they see in communities there? It's possible. It's possible. So I can't venture to tell you who's first, but it is an amazing thing. And so we can go to the next one. With Mipiel, we'll do Mipiel. And so, because we haven't that one,
Yeah.
so that's why I went.
No, you skipped it.
This is Mipiel.
No.
No, that one, the one before. Yeah, this is another, right here.
No, this isn't.
Yes.
This is another one.
Mipiel. This is a different one. See, what's interesting is Piyut Nae Shel Shavuot, right? You have this other nice piyut, a composition, a poem for Shavuot. And what you have to love about what's going on over here is that these are compositions that are happening in the Romaniote communities until recently. People, often there is this misconception that these communities are not usually well educated, right? And absolutely, right? So when you find something like this, you understand the level of education that you have in the community, because whoever is composing this knows Tanakh, knows the Jewish Bible very well, right? He's able to quote half of Pesukim, right? And play around with them and make poetry out of them, right? And so much so that they become part of the holiday. So interestingly enough, this is a chant for Shavuot, and then next to it, we have a chant that became very famous recently. I would think it's probably in the last 100 years, Mipiel. Mipiel, right, it's a famous, we sing it in Hatorah, right? Mipiel, Mipiel, that's the tune that I know. There's a few tunes, different tunes. It's a simple chant, But what I find amazing about this, first, we don't know the author. We have no idea who the author was. But I was happy to see that there is a crossover here, because this MPL is chanted by the community, the Sephardic communities of the Levant, right? And it's also chanted by the communities, the Sephardic communities in the Middle East. So it's really, really interesting.
And it's also very well known within the some Hasidic circles.
Right. So this is really going far. Yes, that was one of the research, the resources I was looking at. They say the song is everywhere.
When Chabad comes here for Purim, that's the one that they go nuts over.
Right. Right. But I think it's the Sephardic communities that produced it, that had it, or the Oriental communities, the Middle Eastern, or But it's clear that we're all using this. So there is a crossover, right? It's crossed over amongst the many communities. A poem like this. What's even more pretty? When I was young, I heard in Spanish, the Boca de Dios, right? Which was, everybody knew it. They used to sing it, or they sing it still in some communities, the Boca del Dios, Seamos bendichos todo Israel. And then some years ago, I was in the library in Jerusalem listening to old recordings, and there came a voice of a woman, and she was singing it in Greek. Right? I don't speak Greek, and if I say what she was saying, maybe I'm saying something, estomato dio, something like that. Navo ima ite lo loto Israel, something like that. I mean, I was only listening. There was nothing in front of me. So, I kept on repeating it because I wanted to learn the tune that she was singing. Da 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 Loto Israel. She sounded very old at the recording, and I'm assuming this recording went back maybe to the 50s. But that is something that is striking to me, because we can see the next El Nora Lila. We can go to the next this poem, and you can see that the Siddur. This is a recent Mavzor, right? Relatively recent, right? El Nora Lila. Who was El Nora Lila composed by? When do we say it first? Yom Kippur, right? This is a major poem that's recited towards the end of Yom Kippur, right? Because we have 5 prayers on Yom Kippur. This is the last prayer, right? The last time that we're going to pray on Yom Kippur, and we all get very excited because we're going to eat soon. So because we get excited because we feel that we've done okay, right, for the day. So our rabbis tell us, the gates are about to close, chant really, really loud, get your prayer in there, right? Whatever you're wishing for. And so this is the opening of the Ne'ilah, right? The prayer is called Ne'ilah. So we say that El Nora Alila. Who was it composed by? This is a composition from one of the greatest poets of all time, right? Moshe ibn Ezra. Moshe ibn Ezra, he's from the 11th century. He had rather an interesting life, very difficult, very poor man. One of these individuals that you wonder. He had such immense potential, but he suffered so much, from aniut and poverty and other things like that. Born in Granada, died in Toledo in 1055, born 1055, passed away some 50 years later. And so this is, and it has his name in an acrostic. I don't know if you can see it. No, this is not well done. But okay, so Moshe ibn Ezra composed this. One of the things I loved, first, you can clearly see the crossover, right? This became a poem recited by even Ashkenazi communities also recently have embraced this poem. Apparently, this might be in the last 200 years that they started using it, But of course, this is a poem that we've been using for a much longer time, but it crosses over. And even, in Sephardic communities, in Romaniote communities, it's being used. But this is the thing that I love the most, translations. And this is something that within our communities, and this is where I see a very nice crossover between these communities, the Romaniote community, the Sephardic community. They're very concerned that the people understand and know what's going on. We need translations, and often the prayer, what we're singing, is translated into the vernacular so that the people can really understand and participate and become part of what's going on. So, I mean, this is just a clear. I don't read Greek, but right, this is a very, very right important thing for our communities that the prayer is understood and often chanted by the community in the language that and we're talking about actual prayer. We're not talking about a PU. We're not talking about just a chanting a song of sorts. We're talking about actual prayer, and it's done in the vernacular so that the people understand and participate. This is humongous, very, very important for our communities. Some other stuff like that. We can look at the next, which is the Pirkei Avot, right?
Yeah.
Right, so this is the Pirkei Avot. And so, very interesting, another custom that seems to have crossed over. One of the great rabbis, his name was Rabbi Shem Tov Gagin. He was the chief rabbi of England. He had an amazing work that he published in the 1950s. And he writes about this very, very old practice that probably went back easily close to about 1,000 years. The Jewish communities, during the weeks and between Pesach and Shavuot, we recite in the afternoon of Shabbat Pirkei Avot. And so every Shabbat, how many chapters are there to Pirkei Avot? Originally, there is 5 chapters only, right? And how many weeks in between Pesach and Shavuot? Usually 6, right? So you're missing 1 chapter. So they actually went and added an extra chapter with sayings of the Talmud from different places, and they composed an extra chapter, a 6th chapter. What is this? Well, in English it's translated as the Ethics of the Fathers, which it's a book of ethics in a sense. Right? It's a book of advice. It's a book that has great wisdom, short statements by different rabbis of different periods, right? And so it really illuminates the person. It allows the person to think and meditate about life, about good things to do, about ways and changes that sometimes we need to do. In our communities, in the Romaniote communities, and the Sephardic communities, what you find is that it's not only recited, but there is a song to it, there's a tune to it. Right? And so that is tremendous. I've been listening to different recordings from different communities, the community on Corfu, the community from Izmir, the community from Istanbul, because the one in Corfu is Romaniote, it's Greco, right? He calls it, we're Greek Jews, he's very proud, right? The Hazan there, and that was recorded. And so you hear the chanting, and the idea behind the chanting is not only that we recite it, but it's easier to be memorized that way once it's chanted in a certain style, right? So impressive. Second thing is that in all of these communities, I find the second thing, which is the translation, right? The Pirkei Avot is translated into the vernacular also. So again, this is just a tremendous thing, because you're sitting in synagogue, you're meditating over statements that are being said, and all of a sudden the statement is being said in the language that I understand, right? And so tell you some of the chanting is the most beautiful, beautiful chanting. We're uploading all of this into a website that we just began to develop. It's called zemirot.org, and we're just loading it all because it's got to be available for all of us to listen to these marvelous, marvelous traditions that, you know, in our communities, they're still alive, and we have to just bring them back to life as much as possible. So this is the one on Pirkei Avot, and now we go to the next one, which is the ones on Purim. Right? This is one of the. We got very excited when we found this booklet. Right? It's Pizmonim Shel Purim, Keminhag, Janina, Ve'arta. Right? So it's specific. These are chants for Purim, for the communities of Janina and Arta, right? If we go back to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is the.
Just I want to.
Just go to the cover for a second.
Yeah.
Right. Belashon Yevani. Right? We printed it. It's in Greek for the Jewish communities of Janina and Arta. על ידי המשתדל להביא את מזבח הדפוס, right? So the person that wrote it to the printing, it's Ezra Mem Negri. I don't know what the name is. I don't know. I'm not sure who that. Kibot Moreno Arab. He was one of the Chachamim. His name was Ezra Negri, right? And then they're cheating on this, right? Because where was it printed? In Salonika. In Salonika, basically the community there speaks Spanish at the time, right? So what they write in the bottom, en la estamparía, right? Estabelida en Salonika, right? So where was it printed, right? At the printing house that is established in the city of Salonika, and this is 1874, which is very, very interesting. So now, see, because it's not easy. You have a small community, right? And so you don't have the same, it's not as easy to print books for that community as it is for a community of 10,000 people or 20,000 people or more, right? When you have a community that's small, 3,000, 4,000 people, so you struggle to print material. But they did print this, but where they printed was in Salonika. Right?
They convinced somebody there to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was marvelous to find that out. But let's go to. And so this is in Greek. Can you see it's all in Greek? This is great. Can we hear a little bit of piece of it? Now we're going to hear a little piece of the. Beautiful, right?
This is like Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. Now we know where Disney got it.
If you read the Hebrew, you see it, right? Fascinating, right? So you have a book that in the cover it says it's in Greek. When you open it up, you see Hebrew writing, but it's in Greek. Yes, we'll take the questions at the end. Right? So it's fascinating, because this phenomenon.
This is the original transliteration.
Yes, this phenomenon we find in many of the Jewish communities of old. They take the Hebrew because it's the easiest. Where did you learn how to read Talmud Torah? Did you go to any other school? No. So which language do you know how to read? Hebrew. What's the vernacular of the community? Greek. So how are you going to write the Greek if you don't know how to write Greek? With Hebrew letters.
written in Greek letters.
So you write. So instead of using the Greek letters, you use the Hebrew letters to write the Greek. And the same thing when you remember when we saw if you want to bring back see, en la estamparía is using Hebrew letters to speak Spanish, right? And this is how it was done in all our communities. In fact, we have now a lot of printings, a lot of books that are coming to life from the Geniza of Cairo, as Marsha had stated, and they are in Arabic. But if you look at the Arabic, the way it's written, it's Hebrew letters, right? So again, it's this already very, very old system that we're using. Yes, Marsha.
Just to bring this around full circle, now you have the Hebrew written in Greek letters in the synagogues because the Jews now can't read the Hebrew, but they can read the Greek.
So there you go. There you go. So if we go back to it, now you wonder what it is. What is it that we're singing here? Well, these are songs for Purim. And it seems to be that we have a very, very old custom. Going back to the time maybe of the Spanish Jews, early Spanish Jews, that they, for some reason, in their poetry, they write the story of Purim in a poetic form. Right? We have the famous Micha Mocha Ve'enka Mocha, right? You also recited, right? That we recite the Shabbat Zachor, the Shabbat that before the holiday of Purim, where we chant this long chant written by Rabbi Yehuda Levi, right? And it's the story of Purim, right? In some of our communities, we recite it in the Hebrew, as it was written originally, and then somebody translated it into the poetry into Spanish, the poetry into Spanish. Well, here you have another such a case where the story of Purim is being written, right, in a composition, right, that it's all in, I mean, here's the translation, but it is telling you the story of what happened with Esther, from all the way from the beginning, right, at the beginning from Ahashverosh, the death of Vashti, and so on and so forth, how the whole story develops. You have the entire story in this one song, right? Which is really, really interesting that we did that over and over again. And you know, when we first found this, Andrew went and he got the translation because we looked at it and we didn't know what it was. So he went, he got the translation, and as soon as I saw the translation, I said, it's exactly the Purim song that the Latinos use, just in Spanish, right? Empezar quiero contar, right? Dichas de Dio Alto, right? Start to speak on a tongue of miracles and song. It's exactly the same. So, you know, I keep on wondering who's first on this, but it's just amazing that there is a real crossover in some of the customs. The last one that I'll be talking about, and then I'll hand it over to Professor Shua, is this other poem that was written in somewhere right in the, my record said it was in the 1700s, but okay. I know this is no, this is from the printing. Okay, Rabbi was from the 1700s. Hayon, Abraham Hayon. You can see his name on the acrostics, right? Right. Aleph Bet Resh He Abraham, right? And that's a very common thing that they do on regards to poetry. All these Hachamim, you know, Romaniote Hachamim or Sephardic Hachamim, they put the names on acrostics, right? And then, as they do that, he again is telling the story of Purim in this one poem. I find interesting is that this poem made it through all the communities, and I really, I'm perplexed. I don't know why. I know that the Syrian community sings this poem. I know that the Turkish community sings the poem, right? And I was amazed to have found it here in the booklet of Songs of Purim. It's part of the songs that are being recited in the community, the Janina or the Arta community, right? And so it's exactly the same song, and it's again telling us the story of Purim. So we see two very, very interesting things. On the one hand, the sounds, as Rabbi Negrin explained to us, the sounds, we're keeping the old sounds, and the new sounds that are being brought by the Ottomans, the Makam, and all that system, we reject it because it's not part of the old religious sounds that we have kept for hundreds, maybe over 1,000 years, right? But there is a crossover on the customs. We know that there was a crossover amongst the rabbis. They had great relationships amongst the Hachamim coming out of the communities, the Romaniote communities, the Yania community, the Corfu community, right? Here we have in the synagogue, we have one of the Megillot by one of the great rabbis, right? Yehuda Bivas. He was the chief rabbi of Corfu for many, many years, and he was a Sephardi rabbi. So really, really interesting how those crossovers are happening within these communities, but the traditions are being kept. The sounds are amazing sounds, and the knowledge of the people was really, really very, very high. They were extremely knowledgeable in their traditions, right? So we'll hand it over to Yes.
It's always difficult to follow Chacham Nisim, but I'll try. So, I'm supposed to talk about Shaddayoth in the beginning, but there are just two more books that I just wanted to focus on a little. Okay, just the arrow.
Okay.
So, as the Chacham was, hinting at, the world was getting almost closer, the Romaniote and also the Sfaradim and Ashkenazim, and even, the Italian communities are getting closer together. And as this time is coming along, we also have the printing press, which is starting to help communities grow and spread information. And one of the biggest, I found the most important thing that we have, well, not one of the most important things we have a lot of important things upstairs, but was this Mishnah that was printed in Livorno. So this is just one of the earlier printings, but it's actually a book that is maybe even 100 years older than that. And it has a very unique sense in this Mishnah where, and the whole Seder of Mishnayot, is that the Nikudot are very different. Where a lot of people, we see these, we always say, Sephardic or Romaniote, or all these people have different pronunciations of certain words, or even certain vowels. But in this book, you have words that the vowels are spelled differently. Where, for example, just one that comes to mind is how, everyone says rabbi now, especially in the Hebrew, but in the Sephardic or, Romaniote or any of these community traditions, it's actually Rabbi. It's actually spelled differently. And there's a lot of other spellings that are expressed in this Mishnah, which represent a lot of these communities. Even the Yemeni Jewish community, they use this Mishnah as well. And another one is, instead of everyone says Nusach, right? So it's really Sfaradim, at least Romaniote, and all of us together, we always said Nosach. So I have a lot of other differentiations, and sadly this Mishnah isn't printed in this tradition of different pronunciations of different words isn't really that expressed anymore. And as the world continues to grow and we start merging as a Jewish people, which is great and beautiful, some of these traditions of certain words are getting lost. And I'm sure the Rabbi would be able to. Even when I said it, I said Rabbi instead of Rabbi. So we got influence, but. So that's just one of the. I just wanted to point this one out because I thought it was very important before I start to the talk on the Shaddayoth. Can you go to the next one? So we also have this other beautiful tradition that's actually expressed since Hanukkah's coming up. I figured I'd sneak this in here, and it's called Megillat Antiochus. So this is actually a tradition that's the Italians, the Yemenis, and also at some point the Iraqi Jews did for a very long time, because Hanukkah doesn't really have a Megillah for us to read. There's no story or book. What we have is really just from the story of the Talmud. Yes, in the Christian text we have the book of Maccabees 1 through 4, but the first two are the better ones. But the Jewish people have something called Megillat Antiochus, which when the Italians came to Greece, they brought their books as well and became part of the community's repertoire of things to recite. So during Hanukkah, you have some of the Romaniote communities and the Italian communities reciting this as well as the Yemeni communities who recite it in Arabic. And I just wanted to just sneak those two in there before I start on Shaddayoth. I hope it's okay. So,
And this was never canonized, right?
This was never canonized, even though you have big rabbis such as Sa'ad Dagon, who's like the head of the institution of the Talmudic school of Surah, who actually translated into Arabic and said this was a book worth reading, and he never said this is part of the Jewish canon. But it's a book that retells a story, and it emphasizes not the battle, but the miracle of Hanukkah itself, which was the lighting of the lights, because in the books of Maccabees you usually get the war side of the story and not the miracle. The rabbis wanted to focus more on the miracle. So the Shaddayoth, as Moshe expresses, we had them in a safe for a very long time, and we haven't seen them for. So you finally get the sneak peek of what we've been missing for the past maybe over 20 years. We didn't have access to that safe. So this. So yeah, until Martin cracked the safe. So these are some of the Shaddayoth that you'll find. This one I believe we have here. These are Shaddayoth that are found in different museums around the world, and this tradition is very unique. The earliest Shaddaya, which is the singular of Shaddayot, it was found in 1611. That's the earliest one we have. So this is as far back as we can date the tradition. And the Shaddaya in general would always be dedicated by community members in response to giving good health to a family member, or thanking God for something that was done for them, or always asking for something. And this dedication was always put on the, can you go to the next one? On the parochet, which was found on the ark, and it just placed around it. And usually, they would only dedicate it during holidays. So it would be dedicated for Sukkot, or for Pesach, or I believe Rosh Hashanah, and even Rosh Chodesh, which isn't considered, people don't think of Rosh Chodesh as a holiday, but it's a holiday. And sometimes when it would be overcrowded, they would even create something. This is a closer version of it. Sorry, the quality isn't the best, but you can see them around in different shapes, and we'll talk a little bit more on that in a bit. And they would even create some sort of belt that they would hang across the synagogue, because after a while it gets overcrowded. And at times, people, when they would rededicate it, they would they would place money for dedication, and they would put it back on the parochet or even on the belts to rededicate it during those holidays. Like, so if your family dedicated something 50 years ago, they would rededicate it again next year or in 20 years from then, just to show their respect to their ancestors, as well as to beautify the synagogue. And so where does the name Shaddayot comes from? So it comes from the way that the introductions of the actual Shaddai would always start with El Shaddai. It would always note one of God's names, which is El Shaddai. And it's interesting that a lot of times when you would read these texts, it wasn't always the same template format. Each time it would start a little differently, depending who wrote it. So for example, El Shaddai Kedashta Oto. So this one, Zeh Shaddai. So this is the Shaddai. It's calling the actual artifact a Shaddai. Where at other times it calls it El Shaddai. It's calling on God. Tachshit Hazeh Kedoshto. So it's saying, now it's calling on God, and it's calling it a tachshit, which is an ornament, or a jewelry, and like this is sanctified. So the Jewish communities, I'm not saying they're struggling with it, but every time they're either referring to the artifact as Shaddai, or they're calling El Shaddai for it, or this is my favorite one, El Shaddai Zeh HaShaddai. So it almost, I'm not going to say it loses its meaning over time, but different community members, when it's earlier, they have a very firm idea of what it's about. And the earlier back, you see it becomes more it's more poetic. And as times go on, the community loses a sense of, is it a Shaddai? Is it a Tachshit? what is it exactly? And it's really just making a request of God and dedicating something beautiful to the synagogue, which is almost a similarity to the temple itself. Mhm. And this one is a very interesting Shaddaya. It kind of looks a little familiar. Does anyone have an idea what it might look like? Close to the Ten Commandments is definitely there, but it's around it.
Sort of British coat of arms.
It looks like a coat of arms. Can you go to the next? The one right after. So over time, there's certain influences going on. This is the first, I believe it's the first Greek kingdom of Otto the First, I believe, and they start mimicking the surroundings behind him. Obviously, they remove the cross; it's not there, but you do see that it is invoking similar ideas. But it's there, things are being influenced. It's not in a negative way. It's it's giving respect to the kingdom itself and to God and to everyone involved. And even over time, you start seeing influences of a lot of people call it the Star of David, which is actually a lot of people associate with Judaism today, but it's actually very recent that it's referred to with Judaism. Before, Jews never really used the star, or called it even the Star of David, And as Zionism grew, the Jewish people started to feel affiliated with this star as it's a Jewish symbol, it's a Zionistic symbol, so it started influencing how they would make Shaddayoth as well. As you see El Shaddai, and it's all written out right across. Here it's just written as well, and you can see it on top.
It's an earring.
Oh no! That's how you would hang it up on the parochet. So maybe if you go back to the, in order to hook it onto the actual item, you would need to pin it in almost. So you could go back now. According to the synagogue, according to the synagogue of Kehila Kedosha synagogue, the New Holy Congregation of Janina, they would usually say some sort of ceremony during Shacharit, during the earliest time or the earliest prayer, when they would dedicate it. They would call it Tachshit Rimon, the ornament of the Torah finals. They would put it when they would put it on for the Rimon is usually referred to the Torah ornaments on. They usually look as bells almost on the Torah. So this was near it, so they would call it that ceremony. And they would usually rededicate it just like on the holidays, as I said before. And sorry. Can you go to the next one? Interesting enough, we see another potential influence, we don't know. We always like to keep it up in there because we never really know who came first, But there are scholars who push this idea that they may have been influenced by the Greek Orthodox tamata, which means vow in Greek, which the Greek Orthodox would go to their priest or during certain priestly holidays. So you're seeing the overlap during holidays, and let's say if they needed some sort of they were not feeling well or they hurt their foot, they would dedicate a foot. If there was something wrong with their eye, they would dedicate an eye. If someone was recently born and they wanted to give thanks, they would, do a whole body itself. And usually they would always do it to a patron saint that would usually cure those ailments. There's also, interestingly enough, we came across another tradition, can you next one? That not too far away, just in Damascus, but has a similar tradition. The wording is very different. It makes no mention of El Shaddai, but the current understanding, and even it doesn't make any mention of El Shaddai, but the same idea of in the synagogue it would be put up on the parochet to be given as a donation for curing ailments or anything like that, like thanking God for XYZ, and it would also, but the holiday that was more special to them was on Sukkot, when they would actually take it from the synagogue and bring it into their sukkah. So there are overlaps all over, and there's not that many. There are Greek Orthodox, churches in Damascus and in Spain as well. I mean in Syria as well, but you don't really see that much of the Greek, these types of Greek ornaments. So the question is, who's getting these ideas from who? And we see a lot of overlap. And this is this research is still going on, and you have a lot of Shaddayoth that are still in archives that we're still combing through. But I felt the need to express that even Jews from other lands had something very similar to this. And yeah, if anyone has any questions.
One question about the etymology or history of the word. So you spoke about how Shaddai ultimately became kind of used interchangeably with actual item and the older reference to God. When does Shaddaya come up? Do you know when that comes about as the word for this?
It never actually, at least from all the Shaddayot that I've seen, it's never once said Shaddaya, it's always just Shaddai. So it's more of a colloquial. So that's something that I wouldn't be
Or
able
like a
to trace.
scholarly almost term for it now, or?
Yeah, now it's a scholarly term, or a takshit. That's what they would also refer to the scholars. But more colloquially, most people refer to it as a Shaddaya or Shaddayot. So,
If you go back to the panel with this star,
yeah. This one?
this one, when Rabbi Negrin came in from Athens, he told us, you see the Mem Dalet there, because we have it on the Torah upstairs.
Yeah.
And he specifically told us that the symbol, the star, was used by the Muslims. So in order to differentiate the fact that it was being used by Jews, they put the Mem Dalet over there.
Magen
Very
David.
David, yeah.
Yeah.
It's true. Is that
So the Shaddayoth that you showed us after this, they all say Tantzeva on the bottom. So it's not this one.
I didn't see anything.
No.
The many
No,
one.
you're going the
wait,
wrong
which? Are you over here?
No, I
No,
did
no,
this.
when
Syria.
The three
Oh,
of
the
them.
Syrian one?
Okay.
There. Tantzeva should be like over a grave.
Behi nishmato tzura, tzura.
Yeah, so it was dedicated for relatives that were passed away. So it's not about for healing or anything like that for the
No.
Syrian community.
Oh.
And then they would take it during Sukkot to their sukkahs, and they would bring it in.
Is it up
To memorize.
So yeah,
Oh, wow.
yeah, it looks like a heart.
Yes.
So
I have another question.
Yeah.
The rabbi mentioned that the Jews in Salonika
mhm.
spoke Spanish in
Yeah.
the 1900s. Why?
Because you had a lot of Jews from Spain that came there, and even I believe it was the ports only spoke Spanish as well. Even the non-Jews spoke
Because we
Judeo-Spanish.
spoke Spanish because it was easier. I'm just kidding.
No, so even
I'll tell you what happened. What happened was that the migration, when the Jews were expelled from Spain, we know, even though we have not been able to really find a document, but maybe Marsha will correct me, but the Sultan invited the Jews to come to the Ottoman Empire. So since we were being expelled from Spain, it was very easy for these Jews to resettle in the Ottoman Empire, the growing Ottoman Empire. What you find is that in those cities that were well established, the Jewish population was increased by many numbers suddenly, right? They went from 1,000 people to 10,000 people, 20,000 people overnight. And all of these people are coming out of Spain. So the language becomes the language that we all speak. We all coming from Spain, we can continue speaking Spanish and it overtook many of the communities that were there. It overtook their language, and within a few generations, even the Jews that were there before ended up speaking Spanish, like the majority of the people, right? What's interesting, right, is that in Janina that didn't happen. In a few other communities it didn't happen, that they did not adopt the Spanish as their language. So Janina still spoke Greek and not Spanish, right? What's interesting is that if you go to certain communities 100 years ago, at the turn of the 20th century, if you came to Salonika, if you came to Istanbul or Constantinople at the time, if you came to Izmir, right? If you came to Jerusalem, you found that the majority of the Jews spoke Spanish.
But it's a
Also-
Jewish variant of Spanish written in Hebrew.
Well, you know, of course, it's a
Like-
Jewish
like
Spanish.
Yiddish,
It's Judeo
like-
Spanish. Like, you know, you'll find
Ladino.
what.
Portuguesismo or Espanol. Yeah.
Right. You'll find that if you go to, Syria, they're speaking Judeo-Arabic.
Exactly.
Of course.
Also, just to add a little more about the communities during the Ottoman Empire, is that the Romaniote didn't have it, I wouldn't say the best, under the Ottomans, because they instituted this system called the Sorgun system, where they would take populations and swap them for another population. So even if they were a strong community, and let's say in Salonika before the Ottomans, invaded, they took the Romaniote communities and they moved them somewhere else. And sometimes if the community was wealthy enough, they were able to convince the Ottomans that we were going to stay. And sometimes they were able to come back and pay a certain tax. But because this population swap happened, and they wanted to put the Spanish Jews there, it gave more of an economic boost to have Spanish Jews all over the place, because you have this interconnectivity. And they were very strong in the port system that even the non-Jews started to learn Spanish to, help the Jews make these trades. And even it was closed on Shabbat. That's how strong the Jews were in Salonika, the Spanish Jews were.
Can I add a little something here? Something that influenced the dominance of the Spanish-speaking Sephardic Jews over the Romaniote Jews is how they were viewed by the Ottoman Turks. The Ottoman Turks viewed the Sephardim as invited guests, and they viewed the Romaniote Jews as an occupied people along with the Greek people. So you're going to treat your guest very differently than you treat someone you conquer. They were definitely given different privileges as far as taxes were concerned, which aided to the growth of the Sephardic community. So that was something that is usually not mentioned, but really was very influential.
I think this is very important. Also, it's important to note that whilst, as you said, the pre-existing communities assimilated in Kavala, in other places in northern Greece, all the way to Monastir and Kastoria, geography militated against this, because you had to go over the Pindus mountain, Pindus range, to go to Janina and Corfu. And geography kept the two separate. But it is important also to remember that one of the first things that the Sephardim did coming from Spain and Portugal, in fact, there were two languages there, was the fact that they were the first to create a printing press in the whole of the region of the Ottoman Empire. Salonika was the first printing press ever established. That is why, you get things printed in Salonika, although they came from Janina.
And you also had these more public libraries for the Jewish people that the Spanish Jews created when they brought it over. And also another thing regarding the printing press, a lot of Sephardim, once you lose a lot, you feel this need to recover a lot of information. So there was actually a lot of works being written by Sephardic Jews at that time after the Inquisition, that they felt the need to preserve and recover. And that's why they created these more public libraries, and they had the printing press, which really spread their works, which, in a sense, converted over the Romaniote community. And the Romaniote community, some of the Hachamim, some of the rabbis were actually really receptive of this as well, because they saw that there was a big wave of Torah coming, and they wanted to be a part of that as well.
Ray Dalvin mentions in her book, which really gives you a picture of what the relationship was between the Sephardim in Salonika and the Romaniote Jews on the other side of the Pindus mountain range. She has a quote there: "God protect us from the Turks of Janina and the Christians of Arta and the Jews of Salonika."
It's certain that apparently before the Second World War there was very little intermarriage between the two categories.
Definitely, and it was definitely an intermarriage. The Jews of Janina were looked down upon by the Sephardic Jews, both in Greece and when they came over here to the United States. They were considered inferior. They were called Grecos, which is a derogatory term. We finished.
Right.
What about the other kind of Jews, the Ashkenazi?
Oh, forget about that.
Were
You know,
they beyond
okay.
the pale?
I'll give you another little quote. In the Sephardim, when they came into Salonika, there was one Ashkenazi synagogue there. It was called the Synagogue of the Ashkenazim. There was one Romaniote synagogue, excuse me, that was called Es Chaim. The Salonika Jews called the Romaniote synagogue La Sinagoga de los Grecos, and they called the Ashkenazi synagogue La Sinagoga de los Locos.
Crazy.
Crazy. They couldn't understand what they were saying, you know?
And then, there's this thing, okay, further north in Europe, there was an old Yiddish movie or something from a long time ago, so beware the Galiciano women.
Oh, yeah, Galiciano and Litvaks,
So
right,
I'm
yeah.
trying to think of which part of Europe the person was from. It was up like.
Probably Litvaks and Galicianos, they had that same rivalry going on there.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say one final thing. I'm just gonna say one thing.
Open up to questions, or you want to continue?
If anyone has any more questions, they could.
I just wanted to say hi. I'm Andrew Marcus. It was a privilege working on this exhibit with Isaac and Rabbi Nissim. But I just wanted to say, hopefully, you learned a lot today. And it was a long time coming, as you heard, over 20 years with the rediscovery of the Shaddayoth. Please go upstairs, look at the text, look at the Shaddayoth, read them. We have captions that translators date them.
So the captions in general around the.
Right, around the whole museum. We have a lot of artifacts in our museum, but hopefully today you appreciate the connection that goes back centuries for a lot of the practices we still do here, for the liturgy, for the melodies, for the text, as well as some of the other artifacts. And so we hope that this continues to inspire our community to maintain our Romaniote traditions, to educate the broader world, and for you all to spread the word that, we're still here as a community, and we should be proud of these traditions, the education of our Jewish communities, the scholarship, the art, the artisanal work, and that we want to continue that and be proud of that heritage. So please give it up again for our two curators.
There is food, but you can't bring it upstairs. So I'm going to put the food out. You can eat down here, go upstairs, and come down here and eat whichever way you want to.
And there are books also.
There's also books, definitely, plenty of books in my